Imagine two bands rising from the same rainy streets of Seattle, but shaped by completely different storms. On one side, you have Nirvana, raw, explosive, unpredictable, a band that didn't just break into the mainstream, they detonated it. On the other side stands Soundgarden, darker, heavier, and built like a cathedral of riffs, driven by unmatched musicianship and the haunting power of Chris Cornell's voice. Both bands defined the grunge movement, but they did it with completely opposite energies, and that's exactly why comparing them becomes a battle of philosophies, not just sound. When Nirvana erupted with Nevermind, the entire music industry shifted overnight. They weren't polished, they weren't calculated, they were a chaotic force of emotion that people instantly connected to. Nirvana made you feel like the world was cracking open. But Soundgarden? They didn't explode, they rose. Heavy, technical, and unrelenting, they fused metal complexity with grunge attitude long before the mainstream even knew what the word grunge meant. The explosion versus the evolution. Their rise was a cultural detonation. When Nevermind hit in 1991, it didn't just succeed, it obliterated the existing music landscape. Overnight, glam metal was dead, underground rock was mainstream, and Kurt Cobain accidentally became the unwilling voice of an entire generation. Nirvana's raw, noisy simplicity spoke directly to alienated youth, who saw Cobain as someone who refused to polish his pain. Their cultural impact was fast, violent, and irreversible. Even today, Nirvana remains the symbol of the moment everything changed. Before grunge was even a buzzword, Soundgarden had already been forging the sound darker, heavier, and rooted in metal traditions. They didn't crash into the mainstream, they climbed into it step by step, shaping the aesthetic of Seattle rock long before it was cool. Chris Cornell's soaring vocals, paired with Kim Thayil's unorthodox guitar work, gave Soundgarden a complexity that influenced musicians who cared about craftsmanship as much as rebellion. By the time Super Unknown hit in 1994, Soundgarden wasn't riding the grunge wave, they were defining its future, proving that the genre could be experimental, sophisticated, and musically ambitious. Raw simplicity versus technical power. Nirvana built their identity on raw simplicity. Their riffs were jagged, minimal, and instinct-driven. Kurt Cobain didn't care about perfect technique, he cared about emotion. Every chord he played sounded like it was ripped straight out of his subconscious. Songs like Smells Like Teen Spirit or Lithium prove that you don't need complexity to create shockwaves. Nirvana weaponized imperfections, sloppy edges, screeching feedback, and unpredictable vocal breaks, turning them into a new form of authenticity. They embraced the beauty of chaos, and that's why they hit the mainstream harder than anyone else. Then there's Soundgarden, a band that turned grunge into a technical powerhouse. Their riffs were built on odd time signatures, heavy metal precision, and near-impossible vocal lines. Chris Cornell's 4-octave range wasn't just impressive, it was intimidating. Kim Thayil's guitar work moved between psychedelic experimentation and crushing riff architecture. Soundgarden didn't just write songs, they engineered them. Tracks like Rusty Cage and Black Hole Sun showcased a level of musical sophistication that no other Seattle band could touch. Anthemic grunge versus dark complexity. Nirvana embodied raw anthemic grunge. Their power came from simplicity that hit like a hammer. Kurt Cobain's songwriting stripped everything down to the bone. Jagged riffs, primitive aggression, and a sense of emotional honesty that felt almost uncomfortable. Songs like Smells Like Teen Spirit and Breed weren't crafted, they were detonated. Nirvana's sound was dirty, unpolished, and intentionally imperfect, built to connect instantly with anyone who felt broken, angry, or invisible. Their grunge was a weapon of catharsis. Soundgarden, in contrast, delivered dark complexity. They approached grunge like metal scientists, twisting riffs and odd time signatures, blending doom-inspired heaviness with psychedelic shadows. Chris Cornell could rise from a whisper to a banshee scream, while Kim Thayil's guitar work created labyrinths of sound rather than punchy hooks. Songs like Black Hole Sun, Rusty Cage, or Jesus Christ Pose weren't written for simplicity. They were designed to challenge, mesmerize, and overwhelm. Soundgarden's world was darker, more cryptic, and more cerebral. Brief flame versus a towering presence. Nirvana burned fast. Their flames shot upward in an instant, lighting up an entire generation almost overnight. Kurt Cobain's raw emotional delivery, fractured songwriting, and anti-establishment energy created a spark that ignited the global alt-rock movement. Nirvana wasn't just a band, they were a cultural eruption. Their music felt like something you survived, not just listened to. And like a flame, they were brilliant but tragically short-lived. Soundgarden, by contrast, rose like a massive structure carved out of stone, a towering presence built through years of evolution. Chris Cornell's 4-octave voice didn't just hit notes, it dominated them. Kim Thiel's guitar work bent metal, psychedelia, and unconventional scales into something monumental. Their sound was darker, heavier, and architecturally precise. Soundgarden wasn't sudden, they were inevitable. Their influence didn't explode, it expanded, layer by layer, until they became one of the pillars of grunge itself. Where Nirvana was chaos wrapped in brilliance, Soundgarden was power sculpted from discipline. Nirvana changed culture instantly. Soundgarden shaped the sonic landscape permanently, Nirvana made the world feel, Soundgarden made the world listen. In the end, the flame and the tower represent two forces that defined a generation. One that burned bright enough to change everything in a moment, and one that stood tall enough to last beyond the era that created it.